Howdy, how's it going? My name's Davvy Chappy, and it's time to wave your hands around and speak some nonsense because we're going to be talking about the wizard's non-pointy-headed cousin, the Sorcerer. I'm going to be going over the class, its special abilities, and its unfortunately few archetypes, and I'm going to get you so convinced on the Sorcerer being a kick-ass class that you'll forget all about those other stupid casters. Except the part I love you, honey, please don't leave me. As always, keep in mind that most of this is just my opinion, and any hexes, incantations, or leviosas that you don't agree with can be thrown out completely. But with that out of the way, let's begin. So the Sorcerer is the master of the metaphysical and a dope-ass caster, and anyone who says otherwise can go suck it. Gaining power from within, whether they be born with it or blessed with it, the Sorcerer is able to take the very essence of what a spell is and mold it to better suit the Sorcerer's needs. This moldification is done with a little feature called Sorcery points, because Wizards is the absolute best at naming things. Every Sorcerer unlocks the ability to use Sorcery points at second level, and the maximum amount that they're allowed to have is equal to their level. At first, these Sorcery points can only be used to give the Sorcerer extra spell slots, which is pretty neat, but that's only the tip of the Dinkelberg. Once you hit third level, you unlock the Sorcerer's signature hat trick, Meta Magic, which lets you power up your spells in a bunch of different ways, from doubling their range to making their saving throws harder to pass, to making their cast completely silent, to copy-pasting the spell that you cast on someone onto another person. There's a lot that you can do with meta magic, and it all feeds off of your sorcery points, so if you ever run out, you can burn a spell slot in a pinch to get more points, since the level of the spell slot equates to the amount of points that you'll get if you burn it. Like all casters, you'll probably feel really restricted by the incredibly finite resources that your class provides during the early levels, but you'll start seeing an exponential growth the longer you play, and eventually you'll find yourself blasting spells everywhere, and wondering why you were ever holding back in the first place. Now, people say that the Sorcerer is inferior because, oh, it doesn't have many unique spells, and it doesn't get any bonus spells from its archetypes, or the Sorcerer doesn't get ritual casting, but those people can go take their facts and stuff it. True, the Sorcerer doesn't get ritual casting, but honestly that isn't the biggest deal in the world, and the Sorcerer has a secret advantage above all the other casters that a lot of people don't recognize. I usually don't talk about saving throws because it's a little superfluous in my guides, but it bears acknowledging that the Sorcerer is the only caster that is proficient in Constitution saving throws, which is a big deal because it means that it has a much better chance at keeping its concentration on concentration spells when it inevitably gets hit by things, which could be the difference between keeping your buff active for another turn or having to waste the turn and another spell slot to recast the spell. It's a bit disappointing that Wizard seems hellbent on making the Sorcerer share all of its toys with the other casters, especially the Wizard. But the fact that it can massively edit all of the spells that it does have makes its casting original enough. But if you want to make your Sorcerer stand out even more, then have I got the archetypes for you. The Sorcerer's archetype represent where their magical power came from, and they grant special abilities from the very first level, so you always feel like the archetype that you picked. Have you ever wanted to feel the power of a dragon pulsing deep inside you? Well, the very first style of Sorcerer makes you like Bruce Lee in that it gives you Dragon Blood, which at first means that you get to speak, read, and write in Draconic, you gain an extra hit point each level, and you permanently have a natural AC of 13 plus Dex. Afterwards, you get to choose which color of dragon you hail from, which grants you bonus damage when using your dragon's element. You can spend a sorcery point to resist that same element for an hour, you can sprout fucking dragon wings, and you can eventually spend a bunch of sorcery points to make yourself one scary dragon fucker. This archetype is good at padding out your Sorcerer and making it a bit more survivable, although it does give off the misconception that it wants the Sorcerer to be more physical and on the front lines rather than just more survivable. I personally think that the last ability is a bit overcosted for what it does, but that's just me. As long as you don't mind hearing everybody either quoting Skyrim to you or going into the details of how your granddaddy banged a dragon, you'll find plenty of enjoyment in the Draconic Bloodline. Okay, so full disclosure, the wild magic archetype is some of the most fun that I've had in D&D in my entire life. The whole shtick is that whenever you cast a spell, your DM can have you roll on a hashtag random table that does a whole bunch of crazy shit, from making you cast a random spell, to making your hair fall out, to turning you into a potted plant, and just a crazy amount of other things. Also, minor note, if you check the description of this video, I've kept a net librum of random magical effects to use in your own game. Your other abilities feed off of this randomness, giving you advantage on a roll and then letting you do it again once you use the wild magic table, letting you spend 2 sorcery points in a reaction to either add or remove a d4 from your roll, letting you roll twice on the wild magic table and take either result, and letting you re-roll a damage dice if any of the damage dice that you rolled maxed out. This archetype is pure insanity, with all of its abilities varying from completely useless to crazy overpowered with every different use of the power. If you have a crippling gambling addiction, or you just like putting your fate in the hands of the dice gods, then the wild magic will either be your absolute best friend, or it'll suck. Either way, I'm sure you'll be satisfied. But changing from being extremely powerful at random times to being extremely powerful all the time, the Storm Sorcerer doesn't even begin to hide its overpowered nature by giving you just a bunch of really good powers with almost no cooldowns to speak of. At first level, you gain the ability to speak Primordial, which is admittedly the least useful thing on this list because the amount of people who naturally speak it is restricted almost exclusively to creatures that don't even live on the material plane and will most likely be angry at you for existing even if you can talk to them. But that little snippet aside, you also, again at first level, fly 10 feet either before or after you use a spell slot, and this movement does not provoke an attack of opportunity, meaning if anybody manages to get close to you, you can just crab walk right out of there with a After that, you gain resistance to both lightning and thunder damage, and you deal damage in a 10-foot radius equal to half your level whenever you cast a spell that does lightning or thunder damage. You can control wind and rain as a bonus action. You can use your reaction to deal damage equal to your level whenever someone hits you and force them to make a strength save or get almighty pushed 20 feet away from you. And you eventually just become completely immune to lightning and thunder damage, and you gain a permanent fly speed of 60 feet, and you can reduce your flying speed to 30 feet to gain the added benefit of giving all of your allies a flying speed of 30 as well for a full hour. That last bit comes back on a short rest, and all the other crap I mentioned literally has no cooldown outside of the action that you use to spend it, which is pretty good since each ability makes it increasingly harder for melee fighters to do anything to you, which effectively makes like 60% of enemies your bitch. As long as you don't rest on your laurels and decide not to take mage armor and shield because you think that you've already become untouchable, you will actually be one of the most annoying things for your DMs to fight, right up until they realize that they can stop fighting you and just have you make save or suck rolls all day, at which point your untouchable status becomes officially fondled. Now, for those of you that find the Sorcerer spell list to be a bit lacking, or you were just looking at the party comp and came to the crushing realization that nobody went healer, the Divine Soul has your back on both fronts. Wizards has been trying hard to get a favored soul archetype for 5th edition that doesn't suck for a good long while now, and Xanathar's Guide to Everything saw them say screw it by just flat out throwing the entire cleric spell list at the Sorcerer and calling it a day. The actual subclass starts by, as I said, giving you access to the entire cleric spell list whenever you want to learn a spell, as well as giving you a bonus spell based off of which alignment you lean towards. You also gain the ability to add 2d4 to a saving throw once per short rest, which is pretty nifty since you can use it even after you've seen what you've rolled. After that, you can spend a sorcery point to reroll any number of dice whenever you cast a healing spell. You can use a bonus action to become God Jesus and sprout wings, giving you a fly feet of 30 feet, and your last ability can be used whenever you're reduced to half your hit points, at which point you can decide, lol nope, and regain half of your hit points back. With the exception of one ability, this archetype doesn't actually force you to grab all the healing spells and dedicate yourself to a life of never getting to play the game, and there are almost certainly some really interesting things that can come out of combining cleric spells with sorcerer meta magic, such as using twin spell on a healing power. So this archetype is good for people who want some extra survivability, as well as a vexed interest in experimenting with a largely untapped world of possibilities. And finally, for those of you edgy boys who want to channel your inner spooky Shadow Master, the Shadow Sorcerer slowly but surely gives you all the fan service abilities you could ever want. For starters, you gain Dark Vision of up to 120 feet, which is twice the distance of most Dark Vision abilities, meaning your long-range night fighting ability is kick-ass. You can also make a Charisma save once per short rest if you go down to 0 HP to instead go down to 1 hit point, just to give you that edgy, you're gonna have to hit harder than that moment. Also, once you hit 3rd level, you can cast Darkness by either spending a spell slot, or better yet, spending 2 sorcery points, and if you use points, then you can actually see through that Darkness spell, which is probably the most broken ability that I have ever seen on an archetype, since it basically means that you get to throw out Darkness spells everywhere that you're planning to fight, and that area is completely denied to enemies, because any who dare enter will get absolutely riggedy wrecked by an unseeable force of shadowy goodness, and nothing is stopping you from firing spells outside of the darkness from within. So the only way to reliably take you down would be to drop massive AoEs on your ass and hope that they sink your battleship. Also, just as a tip, never use the 2nd level spell slot to cast Darkness, because it doesn't give the sight benefit, and if you're strapped for sorcery points, you can just transfer a 2nd level spell slot into 2 sorcery points to cast the spell with the benefit anyway. But after all that craziness, your next ability lets you choose the target and then spend 3 sorcery points to summon a Hellhound, aka a reskinned direwolf, except that it's medium instead of large, and a monstrosity instead of a beast. That comes with temporary HP equal to half of your sorcerer level, and it can go through objects and cover as if it were difficult terrain, and it always knows where your target is at all times, essentially meaning that you can send Demon Fido out of the spooky shadows to kill anyone that starts to figure out how to actually beat you. After that, as a bonus action, you can teleport up to 120 feet through shadows, and finally, you can spend 6 sorcery points to become resistant to all damage except for force and radiant damage, and also it'll allow you to walk through walls for a full minute. So your only worry is running out of sorcery points, which becomes less and less of a worry the longer you play your sorcerer, because anytime you run out of points, you can just funnel more in via your spell slots. I'm not gonna lie, this subclass is a guilty pleasure of mine, since I know it can be hard to believe given my sexy body and perfect stylish hair, but I hit the emo phase hard in middle school, so this archetype pushes all of my preteen edgelord buttons. If your father has a bad habit of trying to talk to you during marching band performances, then the Shadow Sorcerer will keep you carrying on. But that'll about do it. I hope you enjoyed this video, leave a like and comment if you did, and maybe subscribe if you want to be a cool dude. Also, if you want to stay up to date on all of your Davvy news, I keep a link to my Discord and Twitter in the description below. But yeah, Davvy out.